Hello and welcome to today's Fintech Finance Virtual Arena. We've got a really special one today because we are going to be looking at the really interesting world of AML5 and how it's going to completely change a lot of organizations in Europe. And for that, I've brought in two specialists. I've got Charlie Roberts from IDnow and Delphine Chen from Wirex. So both of you, thank you very much for joining the panel here today. Delphine, could I actually get you to give us a brief introduction to your role at Wirex and Wirex itself for our viewers, please?
Yeah, sure. So I'm a business compliance manager in Wirex, and I'm making sure that the business is in line with any new regulation or any new rules at a global level. However, I have a focus on the UK and Europe at the moment. And Wirex is basically an e-money licensed institution with the FCA, and we are providing payment services in fiat and in virtual currency.
Perfect. Yeah, I think that's going to be so important for today's session, that virtual side of things. So, Charlie, thank you also for joining. Could you give our viewers a bit of background to yourself, your role, and IDnow, please?
Yes, thank you. Charlie Roberts, I head up the financial services team for IDnow. So we're actually a German-based business. We're specialise in identity verification, whether it's through an automation or video-based technology. So I head up the sort of EU market in terms of working with clients on their requirements to make sure that they're compliant for the local regulations that they need to meet and adhere to.
Well, that's absolutely brilliant, and we're really going to have to rely on that ID side and that verification side for this regulation talk. So I guess, Charlie, if I could continue with you, with the pandemic ongoing, what would you say is the current state of digital ID verification and onboarding for a lot of banks, and especially maybe some of the neobanks and car platforms that we're seeing?
I guess, I suppose to start with, even pre-pandemic, we'd seen a huge growth in terms of that shift from onto digital onboarding and ID verification. And a lot of organisations were still using a manual approach or a hybrid of manual with some element of digital. But when we did see the pandemic hit, we did see a big increase from organisations that needed to make that shift, that either had that manual process in place already, or were looking to move digitally. So from a fintech and a neobank's perspective, they've all been focused around the digital side. So they've had providers in place, they've got solutions in place. But we have seen certain businesses that literally overnight have had to switch to a remote solution, where previously, and even not just fintechs. If you think about retail's had that big shift from high street to closing the doors to how can we continue to trade and operate as well. So there has been a big growth from ourselves in terms of supporting clients. And now we're at the stage now where there's been a lot of evaluations been done in terms of how they've operated. Some businesses have also had to reduce their processes down and actually increase their risk so they can continue. And now they're evaluating those processes and thinking, okay, how do we employ a longer term strategy? And actually what we have seen is big growth in bringing on multiple providers as well. So traditionally a lot of the fintechs have probably had one solution in place, whereas actually now they're looking at multiple solutions, because it's not just the fintechs and the banks that may have struggled when those restrictions came in. It's also the providers like ourselves and like other ID verification solutions, where they have teams of people that did get hit by restrictions. And you take an example where there might be a call center of ID agents available, that suddenly there's been an outbreak of COVID-19 within the actual call center, and that operation suddenly has to stop and go remote. So it's actually getting on both sides of the table. And I know that a lot of banks specifically now are looking at having multiple solutions in place so that they can switch over if there have been certain restrictions that have come into play on a provider level.
That's really interesting. And Delphine, also, we've talked about the neobanks and the large institutions or even call centers, how they've kind of dealt with this. Wirex is in a really interesting position as this crypto firm, kind of moving into bigger and better things as well. So, I mean, what was, I don't want to focus on the pandemic too much, but what has it been like for Wirex in that position, being quite a forward-thinking, digital-first organization?
So I guess for Wirex during this pandemic, things has not changed that much for the verification of our customers. We have been using AI solution technology to onboard our customers for a very long time. So yes, that was not.
Nice. Yeah, it hasn't changed at all. Well, with that in mind, then, if just to provide a sense of kind of background to the whole story, then, Delphine, if I could ask, really, how have you seen ID verifications change for crypto firms in particular over the last half decade when it comes to regulation and technology? Because it's considered, and maybe incorrectly so, certainly financial services vertical, which is maybe not regulated as much as others.
I think over the past decades, there has been a lot of changes, and regulation and technology has been trying to adapt themselves in the very fast-paced environment that we are living in. And I think the way that technology and regulation has been evolving has not been on the same path. Regulation is still trying to find their way on how to regulate enough and not regulate too much, because they don't want, obviously, to slow down the innovation. But for technology, I think that third-party providers have been quite active on this side, and they have been constantly working on improving, enhancing their verification services. And we can see that, for example, we went from very complete manual documentation where we would just check the document that the client would upload on the platform, from another style that would be, oh, can you actually take a selfie of you with your ID? And so we can actually check whether you're the real person opening the account. So yeah, I think that has been a very positive way for us, for Wirex, because we were able to onboard our customer fastly, but in a compliant way.
Absolutely brilliant. And Charlie, with that in mind, have you seen, as that third party, have you seen an uptake in requests from crypto firms over the last half decade to kind of start grappling and kind of really get to grips with these significant technological and regulatory changes?
Yeah, absolutely. I think for us, there's probably two sides to it. You've got, because we've been working with crypto organizations for a while, even before the recent changes have come in. But there's the different drivers. There's regulatory drivers, but there's also fraud drivers, for example. So fraud has been a problem, and a lot of firms have brought solutions in place to prevent fraud. And then you've also got to think of the different changes with fraud and the different types of attempts that individuals will try and do in terms of defrauding companies. Now, and Delphine mentioned there, where they started out with that manual process, then they've got a document, they've moved to the sort of selfie element as well. And they're all different stages of attacks, if you like, that happen. So whilst now we're very much focused around the regulatory changes, initially you'd have fraudsters that would try and change the data on a document. So they'd manipulate the data on there, and they'd try and pass it off as a genuine document. So the technology came in to prevent that with OCR changes, for example, on a document. Then you've got someone who picks up a document. So it's someone that looks like me, picks up my document, thinks, well, I can probably pass myself off now as Charlie Roberts. That's when the selfie came in. So that next stage, that next level stops that attack. Now, what we're also faced with is that, online now, fraudsters can go online, they can go on and they can buy a document with their own face on there. So it's more sophisticated. Now, we've now moved to that stage where it's now, how do we authenticate identities online as well? So whilst we've seen a lot of regulatory changes come in now, we've had to then adapt ourselves for technology changes. So it's about how can I authenticate maybe the holograms on a document, or how can I take it that one stage further, and how can I actually speak to the customer through, and in terms of video technology, which is a part of our solution that we provide. So, and that's probably that final stage, really, the most secure element of trying to prevent fraud or fraudulent documents or IDs coming through, is having that conversation with the person, because you can ask questions and you can use your own judgment as well. So I think that's what we've seen. We've seen the changes in technology from simple capture a document to selfie and liveness through to video calls now, where we authenticate IDs. And then, of course, you've got the other side of it, which is the regulatory changes, which in the last 12 months have really come into play.
Yeah, I kind of want to tag in there, and if I leave it with you, Charlie, could one of the big points of this discussion is the AML5 regulation. Can you give our viewers who might not be aware of it its implications, what it is, and what's it going to do specifically to the crypto industry?
From the beginning of this year, crypto exchanges and wallets, they need to comply with money laundering regulations for that location in terms of that territory. So they need to perform their own due diligence or KYC on their customers. Now, as I mentioned before, a lot of exchanges already did do so because it was to prevent fraud. They want to understand who they're dealing with, so that they're not getting hit by fraud. Whereas now, from a regulatory point of view, they have to comply. Now, it's been brought in line, say, for example, in terms of the UK under the FCA's regulations. We're a German-based business, and we're actually in the German market. We're regulated by the BaFin, and they've even taken it one step further at looking at organisations around how they passport their regulations from other countries as well. So it's one thing about being compliant for the country that you're regulated in, which is now part of the money laundering regulations. But if I'm a UK business and I want to trade in another country in Europe, previously under, say, the FCA regulations, I could passport those regulations in. Germany's taken it one stage further now and said if you want to onboard and if you want to transact in Germany and you're a UK business, you now have to obtain a license to do so. And there's some regulatory changes within Germany that have kicked in this year, and actually it's the 30th of November where they have to have obtained a license. So that's just one example of another country in the EU implementing those changes. And then it leads us to a whole another conversation around at the end of this year when we exit the transition period of Brexit. How is that handled from the UK point of view as well? So we're not part of the EU as of the 1st of January. So previously we could use the EU regulations. We now don't. So again, it throws another load of questions into the mix on how companies in the UK now are going to transact in Europe.
Well, there's one thing regulators don't like, and that's lots of questions around their regulations. So I guess, Delphine, could I get your input really, having that specialization in the UK and Europe for a crypto firm? Do you think these changes have been necessary? Do you think they're actually going to, in the long run, benefit crypto firms and that your customers? Or is this just an example of a regulator going one step further just to cover?
I think this regulatory changes was very necessary because regulating just provide better legal certainty from one side as us as a business, as a business, but also for the customers. They will know that this firm is whether legitimate or not, and they could avoid to be involved in some kind of dodgy crypto transaction. And I think that the fact that, as Robert has mentioned, is that the only inconvenience with this new regulation framework is that there is currently no mutual recognition of the license or the registration that you could obtain. For example, in the UK with the FCA, or in Germany with the BaFin, and this could cause legal uncertainty for crypto asset business.
Yeah, I can completely imagine. And with that in mind, Charlie, I've got to ask, from your specialization in the ID verification industry, is this something that's going to be affecting all crypto firms equally?
Yeah, absolutely. And like Delphine touched on just then, it's because it's the crypto firms that need to be compliant. So as a technology provider, we can provide the technology for different types of markets in terms of how they can meet those regulations. But yeah, I think it throws up a lot of questions. You could go to a law firm in Germany. You could go to two law firms, in Germany, and ask them the question. They could both give you a different answer in terms of what you need to do to be compliant.
Right.
So it is very difficult. And again, we speak to loads of different organisations, and some of them take a different approach. Some of them have a very high risk threshold. Some of them have a very low risk threshold. But ultimately, it comes back to what they decide to do. I think again, touching on what Delphine just said, then the good thing about regulations like this is it does prevent what we call bad actors coming into the marketplace. When you put certain barriers in place, it does act as a deterrent as well. So, other countries as well have made changes. You take somewhere like Estonia, for example. Now they've introduced, again, for crypto within Estonia, you've got to use video-based onboarding now. So they've got some quite strict regulations, as have Germany and other countries in the EU. They haven't come out and updated their own regulations around crypto specifically at this stage. So there's going to be a lot of changes happening, I think, coming up over the next sort of 3 to 6 months.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, with that in mind, obviously, Delphine, just like IDnow, Wirex are quite a European-wide organization. You have HQs in numerous places. And with that in mind, do you think BaFin's response is being measured? Do you think that you're going to continue following on from the German regulatory kind of standard set, since it's pretty much encompassing and forces if you want to trade in Germany as well? Is this going to be the regulation you set your standards by?
So at the moment, we have been analyzing a lot of not only Germany, but other EU member states regulation. And I think the tricky part is that this, as a directive, the national implementation has not been the same everywhere. So as a crypto asset business, we need to adapt ourselves to each market. And for example, in France, they have introduced some kind of mandatory licensing regime for certain type of crypto assets. For example, the exchange of from crypto to fiat and the custody wallets. And for the others, such as trading platform or any other kind of services, they have decided that it will be like an optional licensing regime. And this is currently this kind of new challenges that we need to face. And there are also some language barrier for us, I would say. And the regulatory regime is obviously not the same in across all Europe.
Sure.
And coming back to one of the questions actually you were asking was about do all the crypto firms have to comply with the regulation? I would say no. Not really, because for the ones that are not actually captured into the exchange of virtual currency and fiat currency and the custody of crypto asset services, those ones could still operate in a more unregulated way, and I would say that this would create some kind of demarcation between crypto asset providers that will be regulated and the one who owns. But fortunately, I think that the EU Commission has recently introduced a draft proposal to regulate those kind of crypto assets that are not captured under the 5 AMLD or any other local regulatory framework. For example, I think the proposal aims to capture utility tokens or asset reference token or stablecoin, and I think this is going to be another new challenges. But hopefully, there is going to be one single licensing regime that each member state will need to implement by 2024.
Okay, well, with 2024, would you both agree that that's a good enough time for the industry to kind of take that steps to mature? Charlie, is that, realistically, are we going to start seeing crypto firms finally be considered to be as well regulated as typical large financial institutions?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the larger organisations already are. They've got a lot of practices in place to make sure that they meet regulations, but also meet their own, I suppose, KYC requirements that they set out for to check their identity of the customers that are transacting. So yeah, I mean, that gives us 4 years to get things in order in terms of have a framework in place. But I think it will happen quicker than that. I think businesses will be forced to do that, and I think the changes, especially I think from a UK point of view, especially leaving the EU, and again, even if there's other implications around that, is if there's a deal or there's no deal Brexit, that will have implications on businesses in the UK again, transacting in Europe. So I think next year's, it's weird. We're coming out of this. Well, we're still in this sort of pandemic period. But I think next year there's going to be a lot of changes, not just with the pandemic, but with Brexit, with the regulatory changes that are coming in. We'll find other local regulators bringing in their own amendments to their regulations as well. And I think there's going to be a lot next year. It does look like a really interesting year in terms of changes that are going to be happening in the sector.
It's I don't know how to treat that. You feel like you've come out of the frying pan and into the fire almost when it comes for a lot of businesses after hearing about Brexit on top of these regulatory and technological changes. Now, speaking of those technological changes that you were mentioning, and both of you have been speaking about this, but Charlie, if I could go to you again, you were bringing up IDnow bringing in, and obviously Baffin making it that not just biometric technology when you're onboarding a customer, but video authentication, no longer just a selfie, but actually have to have a video alongside that. So can you tell our viewers how that's going to work if they haven't been exposed to that before?
Yeah, so I think especially for the UK market, we're more alien to video-based onboarding. Whereas actually, if you live in Germany as a country, it's second nature. Customers expect to go through a video verification call to open an account and to transact. So it is very different. However, if you think about it from a user experience point of view, it actually is very beneficial at the same time, because using our solution as an example, we've got agents that guide the user through the process. The way that technology's moved, often a blocker with technology is the user's ability to be able to use the device. So when they pick up their phone, they're trying to take a selfie, trying to capture their document, it doesn't always work. Whereas actually with an agent having a conversation like we are now, they have control of the device. They can turn the camera around. So they can say, I'm going to turn your camera around, please present your document. Now I'm going to turn your flash on, because you're also reliant on the environment in terms of where that person's sitting, and they could be in a very dark place. So the agent can turn a flash on and read the document properly. So I think video based, although it's not a regulatory requirement in the UK, I know we will see more of it coming into the marketplace. I mean, as an organisation, we're working with a number of companies at the moment implementing our video-based technology for the UK market. We do a lot of work in the Irish market. We have banks there that use video-based onboarding, although again, it's not a regulatory requirement, but they use it to open their accounts because it's the most secure method. Because if you think about when we're having a conversation now, if I pose a question to you, if you're being coerced into opening that account, then you're either going to look to the left or right of the screen for reassurance from that person that's standing behind the screen.
Yeah.
Or if I ask certain questions and you look above the screen, you're typically reading a script. And they're signs that agents can look for, so they can use their own judgment on actually, do they believe this person is genuine or not? Whereas when you're using pure AI and technology, you're not having that one-to-one conversation. So it's a very different experience, but there'll be a hybrid version introduced. In the UK, we won't need to adhere to the regulatory requirements in Germany in terms of the strict process that they go through. Whereas, we can bring in AI and video at the same time, start with automation, and then finish with that video call as a final stage as well. So I think we'll see a mix of the two coming into play.
That's really exciting to hear, that kind of customer experience angle, as well as reducing the risk. And I can see that having use cases as well with potentially older generations. I don't want to, just peg them in one certain basket, but being able to actually have someone, and I think this actually transcends multiple generations actually, being able to actually talk to someone through the onboarding process, I think could be quite interesting. I mean, with that in mind, Delphine, is that something that, as I mentioned earlier, Wirex having a variety of locations, are you looking at pulling in different technological aspects to your ID verification that are successful in some areas and could potentially become successful game changers in the UK market?
I think we could consider those kind of options, but usually at the moment we would use these video chats for more, I would say, suspicious onboarding. Usually we would use it to verify that the customer is really the customer that he's pretending to be. So we will use Zoom or Skype or WhatsApp or Google Hangouts, and we would ask additional questions when we are onboarding them. But on the other hand, the video chats takes a little bit more time for the customer to be onboarded.
Sure.
Because it would require a good Wi-Fi connection. Sometimes it just doesn't always work. Also, it would require that one of our customer supports to be here to handle the case. And so I think from a customer point of view, it's a good onboarding process, but it can be improved better with other way.
Do you think it's going to become a bit more natural for a lot of UK, and I'll offer this up to both of you, Charlie, if I go first, do you think this is going to become, I hate to use the phrase because it's almost been overused at this point, like the new normal? As people, Delphine, you said one of the criticisms might be the fact that you require a strong Wi-Fi connection. Now people are doing everything from home, working from home, etc. Charlie, do you think this is going to become effectively, as I did just say, the new normal in the UK potentially?
Yeah, I think there's two things there. One thing I'll just touch on, which Delphine mentioned as well, is that we do see an increase in requirements of video based for enhanced due diligence. When if there's a higher transaction level, for example, the video base can be brought in to actually verify further verification of their identity. So they may have used AI to verify, and they might use video when they get to a certain threshold. So that's one of the use cases that we do see an increase of at the moment. But yeah, I suppose in terms of the UK market, lots of, and if we talk about banks as an example, banks already have a call center infrastructure in place. So a lot of the larger organizations might have back office compliance teams as well in place. So the way that the technology is designed is that you can either use someone like IDnow, who've got our own agents. We've got about 10 call centers we operate out of. Okay. Or you can take the technology and actually implement it and use your own agents and your own team. And again, so keeping it in-house, keeping it in brand. So whereas our video verification call is very much, we'll follow a number of steps required to verify their identity and finish the call. Banks, for example, might decide to use it as verify their identity, but then continue with other parts of the account process as well through that video call. So you've got flexibility there. I think the limitations around Wi-Fi. One of the other features that our agents would do as part of the call is if they were struggling with the connection, they can even guide the user and say, well, actually your Wi-Fi is not very strong. Can you flip onto 4G on your phone? And then suddenly your connection would improve. So there's even help there around guidance around trying to help them connect as well as part of the call. But I do think now businesses that have had to close their doors are going to be looking for an alternative method, and video based is probably the next step for them to look at in terms of verification online.
Very interesting. And Delphine, as I said, the new normal. Where do you see the new normal for ID verification going forward?
I think the new normal for going forward is going to be biometric. So a lot of new, I think so. Third-party providers have been more and more clever, innovative in the way that they want to provide solutions to crypto businesses when they onboard their clients. And for example, for the current solution provider that we are using right now, there is a lot of cooperation, and they're always asking us for any feedback and how to be more creative, and how they could improve the services if, for example, we can flag them some kind of specific fraud patterns, because some fraudsters are becoming more and more creative. They would use very good Photoshops, and they would open up multiple accounts with different ideas. So I think if we continue in this route with a great cooperation between fintechs and solution providers, that's the future.
Brilliant. And yeah, with that in mind, Delphine, what do you at Wirex look for as a crypto custodian? What are the key things you look for in a third-party solution?
I think quality first, a compliance solutions with any laws, especially in UK and Europe, and something that would be a seamless user experience. It is really crucial for us as a provider to have a very innovative solution at the same time, but that is, again, I refer to what I was saying previously, a provider that would be open to any of our feedback and to incorporate them in their new software features.
Interesting. Well, guys, I think that's all we have time for. I've had an absolutely brilliant time, and I've learned a lot more about these kind of German regulations that are going to effectively be quite all-encompassing to the rest of the industry. So thank you very much, both of you, for joining today. I hope you've had a good time yourselves.